How's it going, guys? EclipseNine here. Thanks for joining me again for part 2 of my symbol art theater tutorial series. If you've seen the other videos on my channel, then you already know I'm a big fan of the symbol art system in PSO, and my end goal of this tutorial series is to help everyone enjoy creating symbol art as much as I do. I dream of a world where no one bothers to type anything in-game, because there's already a hilarious image that exists and says exactly what you need it to in a far more convenient way without any of those pesky letters, especially for us controller players who don't have a USB keyboard. That being said, none of the tips contained in this series will ever be a replacement for time. Investing time is the best way to improve your art, and while the tips in this series might help you work a little quicker, more efficiently, and maybe even a little bit smarter, you're still going to need to put in some work. In this video, I want to walk through the first steps when putting together new symbol art, particularly when replicating art that already exists, like a meme or a specific character. The character we'll be looking at in this chapter will be Big Fat Bugs when he's making fun of Elmer Fudd. That's right, let's make us a big Chungus. Before we start sinking a lot of time into making art on our controller, I'm going to pop over to some real design software on my PC real quick and take a look at our guides and spacing. I don't always put guides over the top of my reference image, but I always do it in the symbol art editor. Check out part 1 of this series for more on that, as well as a quick rundown on placing the guides in-game. I'll be using some images generated in Photoshop for the sake of this tutorial, but it's really more intended to represent the thought process we should try to employ when we're first getting started, rather than steps and preparation that must be completed every single time you want to make a symbol art. External software is by no means an absolute necessity, and I've chosen to use it here for the sake of visual aids. We've got an image of Chungus here that I'm going to be using as a reference. It's a good, clean image of our character with nothing else cluttering the screen or covering any details. But you may have noticed right away, we've got a bit of a problem. Chungus is a lot taller than he is wide, and he won't fit into the widescreen orientation of symbol arts. I'm using the green box here to represent the dimensions we have to work with in-game. Right out of the gates, we've got a choice to make. The first option is to shrink Chungus down a bit. Even in full HD, we can already see we've lost a lot of detail by shrinking him, and it'll only be worse at symbol art size, a tiny space that displays pretty tiny pixelated elements with only a couple of exceptions like guild screens and projectors. So then, what's our other option? We're going to have to do some cropping, which means prioritizing some features over other. What's worth keeping and what's worth cutting out? Let's take a look at some of our options. What if we try to keep the feet in frame? I guess this is pretty funny on its own, just a big chunky belly. But it's not near as funny as it could be, and it's not instantly recognizable like we want. Trying to keep the feet in frame seems like a futile effort with very little payoff. They really don't provide that much for the amount of work it would take to fill in those details, so no matter what final cropping dimensions we decide to go with, it's probably not going to be worth the effort to include the feet. What if we move the cropping in the other direction and focus on the ears? Okay, this crop is a lot better than the first one, but at this point it should be pretty obvious we're not going to be able to fit the entirety of both ears without shrinking Bugs down to the point that we lose some of the face details. The ears are just too tall to fit in our widescreen orientation, so we're going to have to sacrifice at least part of them. So, what are the most important features here? The kind of things that will make the image instantly recognizable, even if it's the only thing you see. The face on its own isn't much different than regular Bugs Bunny, but there are 2 lines that add all that extra heft we love so much, highlighted here in green. Regardless of what we decide to crop out, these 2 lines absolutely need to stay. They do almost all the heavy lifting when it comes to giving Chungus his chunk, to the point that we can even crop out his belly without it looking like he's lost any weight. See? Still looks pretty good. It's very clearly Chungus, and this actually would make a very good symbol art. We've got some space to either side for anything we want to add down the line. It's a tight-in close-up of the face which conveys really well in symbol art form, and it's big enough that most details will still read clearly at the smallest size, but I wanted to include at least some of the body, so we're going to need to figure out a good balance between everything we've tried so far. So here's what I've decided to include in the symbol art. The tops of the ears aren't needed, and neither are the feet. We've got the face centered, and it's big enough that we should be able to keep all the details when we start slapping down symbols to replicate Bugs in-game. What you might choose to include comes down to your own preference and what you plan to use the image for. I'm going to want to include some text eventually, so I'm going to go ahead and bump Chungus here to the side a little bit. Now that we've figured out what to include, we've got to figure out how we're going to make it. For now, I'm going to keep using Photoshop to break down our pieces. Again, this isn't something you necessarily need to do, but it certainly doesn't hurt to approach the in-game side of this process with a more concrete plan. It also makes for a great visual aid for the purpose of this video. What we want to be doing here is breaking Chungus down into as few shapes as possible. This type of thinking is pretty typical for all types of graphic design, but it's especially important here. When you're working in Illustrator or Photoshop, you're free to create your own shapes to fit your needs. In symbol art, our only option if a shape doesn't fit is to add more shapes. That probably won't be a problem with this particular piece, but the symbol count of details spirals out of control really quickly. There's no bigger drag on your time than cycling through 225 layers, trying to figure out which ones you can delete to free up some space. Right off the bat, we've got a big circle making up the bulk of our character. Awesome. Circles are simple and easy to work with. We've got another circle up top for his head, stretched just a little bit taller than it is wide. These two pieces make a great starting point, and if you watch a video of a cartoonist sketching any of these old Looney Tunes and Disney characters, these two circles are going to be the first things that hit the paper. Real quick, before we put these parts into the symbol editor, let's slap some guides down on our reference image to help us when we're placing them in-game. These guides will help us frame and plan our piece. And I go into more detail about why guides are helpful in part 1 of this tutorial series. Now we've got a solid foundation to build off of, but we've got some more basic shapes we can put in place to make our job a little bit easier. The right side chunky cheek is a circle as well, so let's put the counterpart in place in our editor right away. When you're planning these basic shapes, try not to get too hung up on the lines. Our newest circle covers up a lot of details, but the important thing is that we get that outside curve of the cheek. We'll add details and other parts over the top of it later down the line. There are a few more circular shapes we can make use of in the face, but we'll only focus on one for now. Right here in the neck, highlighted green on the right, we'll put that in place within our editor right away, and it will form the outside edge of his big jiggly Chungus neck. For now, that's all the blocking we'll do on the face. Obviously, we'll be able to use simple shapes for the eyes as well as the left cheek, but those are all higher layer details, so I'm going to ignore them for now. We'll put them in later right before we're ready to start putting the lines in for the details. These 4 circles on their own really don't seem like much, so as we finish building the basic shapes of Chungus, we're going to need to start connecting them with smaller pieces. These pieces should look something like what you see in black over on the right. We can use a half circle piece to form the shoulders. Best way to do this is to take the circle we used to make the belly and duplicate it by going to Edit, Duplicate. Now scale it up a couple of steps in each direction. We can then go to Miscellaneous, Change Part, and whatever part we choose will go into the editor with the same scaling, rotation, and skew data as the original. If you've watched some of my high-speed videos, you'll see me doing this all the time, especially with letters, but also with smaller details. When using lines that are a similar size but different shape, copy-pasting and changing the part is a lot quicker than placing a fresh piece and scaling it to where you need it to be. The last thing we need to do with this piece is send it to the back layer. We're going to go to Sort, Send to Back to do that. Now we'll use smaller pieces to fill in the rest of the edges. I recommend using the miscellaneous Add Parts Above option as much as possible. The Add Part button up top will place a new piece as the very top layer. This means lots of hassle moving the layer to where you need it to be from that top position. The Continuous Motion option under the Sort tab will allow us to move the piece freely between layers to get it to where we need it. However, because of the way our layers are displayed on the left, with no color or sizing information represented, it can be really easy to lose track of the piece you're moving as it passes through a group of similar shapes. During this time, we're going to be using the Rotate, Scale, and Skew tools a lot. All 3 tools can be manipulated with either the joystick or the D-pad. Generally speaking, I prefer to use the D-pad. It makes it easier to only adjust in the direction you need to manipulate, as well as making it easier to count the number of steps you take if you need to replicate the transformation on another piece. The Skew tool can get a little wonky, and you'll need to keep an eye on the dot that lies outside the bounding box. Regardless of how the piece is rotated, using Skew will change the piece relative to this point. The same can be said for rotation. Due to the nature of the editor, a square or circle may look skewed or warped a little bit if you're rotated slightly off center. This can be annoying, but can also be used to your advantage. The goal here is for us to use as few pieces as we can, while still outlining the edges of Chungus. The fewer pieces we can use here, the more space we'll have for detail and lettering further down the line. As we continue to work our way around the outside edge, try to keep in mind where we're going to be using each color. It doesn't need to be perfect, as small gaps can be hidden with line work, but the cleaner and more organized we can be here, the easier it will be when we're making our final pass to clean things up at the end of the project. The shape of the ears up top are a perfect match for the leaf piece. I'm going to squish and skew these shapes to get as close to the match as I can, but don't worry about the gap in the middle. We're going to be covering that up with the inner ear later down the line. You remember the left cheek and eyeballs I said we'd worry about later? Well, it's later, so let's throw a circle for the cheek, and after scaling them taller than wide, we'll do the same for the eyes. We're to the point now that this video is getting pretty long, and I'm worried if I go any longer, I run the risk of 2 days of blue screens as my 8-year-old laptop struggles to render. This is a good place to stop and build some hype for part 3. We've built the basic shape of our Chungus and laid the groundwork for the details we're going to add in the next video. Between cutting the voiceover, recording the artwork, and editing all of it together, this video wound up being a lot more work than I bargained for, so give me a couple days to finish part 3. Looking at the schedule for the next couple days, I think I'll have it ready for your viewing pleasure sometime Wednesday night. If you're willing to hit that like and subscribe button, I would really appreciate it, and it would go a long way to reassure me that all this work is worth it. If this video was helpful, or if you think I'm just a blowhard trying to feed my own ego, please take a moment to let me know in the comments. Your feedback on this video will go a long way towards shaping part 3. Did I rush through something a little too fast? Let me know so I can fill any gaps I left or details I forgot in the beginning of the next video. I can't thank you enough for giving me your time today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again, and happy hunting!